Welcome, everyone. This is Shawn Yeager. I am VP of Sales for Dataswift and delighted to have you with us today. We appreciate you taking the time, particularly for those of you in the UK that are at the end of your day, understanding particularly that tomorrow is a bank holiday. So thanks again for taking the time. For those stateside like me, thanks for hanging with us as we get into the lunch hour. And I am delighted to be joined today by Dataswift's founder and the executive director of HatLab, Dr. and Professor Irene Ng. Irene has been working in the space of personal data from the standpoint of economics, governance, legal, technology for going on a decade now. And for those of you who may or may not know the story behind Dataswift, I won't bore you with too many details, but all this to say that it began as an academic and research pursuit by a number of leading universities in the UK over the course of over 7 years, and then became a commercial entity last year, or rather the year prior, and went through a bit of a name change and a rebranding last year and became Dataswift as it is today. And so what we're going to discuss during this conversation, Irene will present some of her most current thinking, and we'll ask a few questions, have a little chat, is really about the issue of designing for trust, specific to applications and digital experiences, whether you are a startup or early stage company building from scratch, or a large enterprise looking to evolve or change products to meet some of the challenges that we all face today. And for those who have attended our first webinar, you'll know that we laid the groundwork. For those of you that have not, that's available at dataswift.io/resources. And I'll reference some of that material and certainly would encourage you to go back and review that for some of the baseline. So with that, Irene, I'll turn it over to you to go through your slides, and then we'll have a bit of Q&A.
Right, thanks, Shawn. I thought maybe it'd be nice if everybody saw me. Hi, I'm Irene Ng. That little phone box with books inside is just across my road, the road here in Cambridge. I'm just sort of 2 miles west of Cambridge at my home. So this is just me and saying hi. That's not some disembodied voice talking over a webinar. It's always nice to have a face. And so this is mine. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so bear with me. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Excellent. So what I really want to talk about today is the way we've been designing and thinking. I'm a market design economist. So a lot of what I do is really about redesigning markets. And where markets are not functioning very well, I try to, redesign them. And this particular market has been in its redesign phase for about, maybe about 7 to 9 years now. It's getting along, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that's just come up in terms of how we think about it and how different we think about the technology. We call these entities that we've created, this technology called personal data accounts. And I believe that that's really the foundational technology for what we call data economy 2.0. What does that mean? What does data economy 2.0 mean? Well, I believe in the next 5 years, and I'm hoping to make it true, the enterprises will no longer need to collect, store, or own personal data of their customers because their customers will be doing it for them. I mean, if you think about the problem, data economy 1.0 has been a fantastic commercial success for a few. It's built on centralized databases that pretty much leaves out a lot of small enterprises and applications because they can't deal with the liability of personal data. This is a real problem because it used to be that identity is the only type of personal data that is a huge liability. And so we have identity infrastructure and we have all sorts of things around security identity. But recently with COVID-19, you start to see Bluetooth data around contact tracing, you start to see location data starting to become really sensitive and becoming a liability. And this is really worrisome for a lot of the smaller websites. They are not Google, Facebook, and Amazon, which is basically everyone else, because having a liability increases risk. And the issue with the data economy 1.0 is to reduce that risk, is to bring everybody into that bubble. because inside that bubble, things are handled the way they would handle it. Facebook would handle it in a certain way that's secure, that's in their environment, right? But the rest of the websites, it's really tough because it's a liability, and it's really difficult trying to handle what that liability means. We think that the solution is that the liabilities will disappear when you actually give legal ownership and storage and control to the individual. And when we created personal data accounts back in 2015, we believed this was going to be the thing. Like, people get to own and store and control their data. And we think it is still a thing, but we quite quickly realized that it's not just about you having legal ownership, storage, and control. It's about the fact that if you do, and all of people do, it actually can cause quite a bit of harm. As we know, human beings will give away all the data for some pizza. Maybe not you, but certainly some research has shown that this happens. And it's not surprising, because even with money, we are easily scammed. People will just take anything. If you put everything in one place, your money in the place, your data in the place, it's easy for scammers to get to you because they know it's there. So it took about 3 years actually to really think through what it means by a person having a personal data account, like the way he has a bank account, and how do we actually get the data to move. You start to think about the word trust, and Shawn constantly is on my back about this and say, why, you know, where is trust in all this? Why is trust not good enough? Do we trust the NHS? Can't we trust them to handle it well? Well, the issue is the lack of trust really comes from a lack of standardization. If somebody says to you, the color is yellow, there is a benchmark to know if he's lying or not. You look at it and it's brown, and you say, that's not yellow, it's brown. If you say, I made a payment and you didn't, you know he's lying because the payment wasn't made. If he said something of which there was a standardized way of explaining and describing it, you know absolutely whether it's the truth or not. So in a way, trust comes from a lack of standardization. Standardization in the way, in data conduct, the way data is collected, the way it's stored, processed, shared. And because it's shared and all that data conduct sits within centralized systems, and there are thousands in the world today, this becomes an issue because there are thousands of ways of doing data conduct. And individuals just have no certainty of the practices. You can say, this is fine, I'm looking after it really well. It doesn't create trust because it's not a standardized practice. It is not shared by everybody, and every company is different. And when there's no assurance of good practice, there is a lack of trust from ambiguity. And it is a kind of accelerated because with all the privacy laws and regulatory regulation coming in, everybody wants to make sure they are compliant, and they create practices that are, again, different from everybody else. So the way we look at it is, why don't we just standardize that exchange to become a contractual exchange? We know what a contractual exchange is. When you pay money to a shop, you don't say, I'm going to give you money in this way. I'm going to give it to Ben, who's going to give it to Raj, who's going to give it to Tim and give it to you. And if you're the person receiving that money, you go like, what? Why are you giving me money that way? I don't trust it. But it's fine. Tim and Raj and Ben, they're all very trustworthy people. I said, yes, but that's not the way you pay. And the way we pay today is a contract. When you actually pay some money, you get some benefit back. And that benefit and the money paid is a legally binding mutual agreement that standardizes the exchange. So from our point of view, if we can't all agree what data conduct is, well, let's just make it a legal contract. So what really, when people ask me, what is a personal data account? A personal data account is a server in the cloud that really legally belongs to you. But more importantly, it sets up a system of which you can legally contract out your data license it for a duration and a purpose, and you hold the organization that took it to account, to legal account of how they're going to use it. It creates a level of standardization because trust is really built on the opinion of others. And the opinion of others occur when everybody sees is a standardized way. And if there's a standardized way of doing this, then enterprises really will benefit because they can create products as part of the offering. They can ask for more data. They can access better quality data. As individuals, of course, we start having our own data, which we can contract it as a contractual asset. Data itself becomes a currency. And you can really then start to think about what the benefits are in exchanging that data. So building trust, therefore, is really around standardization and transparency in data conduct. And if you think about what the attributes of this data contract is, they are really baked in the infrastructure. Data economy 1.0 have shown us there are some simple attributes for a good data infrastructure. Resilient, security, elastic, simple. All these are good data infrastructure. And what happens is when you start having an application, you start thinking, all right, I'm using the application as a person on a device. There is some kind of data conduct between a centralized app server and a device. This is exactly where the entire debate with the NHS X app is sitting. Right, if it's centralized, it's not private. If it's on device, it is private. Actually, I have a lot to say about that, but I won't say it here. The point here is there are some attributes of a good data infrastructure, and it's there, but it's not enough. Because now what we are clamoring for is really what we want from a data economy 2.0. We want a privacy infrastructure. We want to know there is a standard to which we can stay private. And if you think about what you're looking at, it really is a two-legged stool. And two-legged stools are not stable. Even if the driven is drawn like that, but it's not stable. And I like to think that personal data account is the third leg, in the sense that if you had a personal data account, you can have some data on device, you have some data in the centralized app server, and you can some data in your personal data account. Now, you can start thinking, where is the data sitting? Where should it sit? Where should identity sit? Where should your ID sit? Where should your location sit? Sometimes for the purpose of analytics and better societal good, certain types of attributes like health and symptoms should sit in the centralized server because you get better analytics out of it. Maybe the ID and all the sensitive bits should really sit in per personal data account. Now we're starting to think about different ways of being able to put data in different places, making that little three-legged stool and the application that sits on it much, much more stable. And we can then call into account what privacy really means as an infrastructure and as a standard. So for us, we spend a long, long time thinking about this. We have partners, of course, if you go to sharetrace.org, that's the COVID-19 contact tracing app that's coming out in the next 2 weeks that's built on personal data account. There are different ways that different clients and partners build on personal data account, but we have a way of saying there is a rating system. There is a way to say, with this app, the way it collects, the way it stores, the way it processes, the way it shares, it's AAA, ABA, and AB star A. Oh no, sorry, ABA star, which is the latest app just gone out. And that's a way to say, well, we have different ways of doing things. There are different kinds of data conduct, and as a result, there are different data products. So this is kind of what I was trying to explain in how we can build trust, building a data conduct where collection, storage, and processing and sharing is standardized through contract makes it a lot easier to build trust. We spent a lot of time looking at the tech stack for Data Economy 2.0 and their entire model of governing and regulating the data conduct between the enterprise and the individual for their personal data account. And also fundamentally really trying to shape what this new relationship is based on and to know how to ensure that the governance is robust and that everybody plays with the same kind of rules and have the same, are actually assessed with the same kind of standards. What has then happened was we've got clients coming in and they've, over the last 1 year, have said, we're going to use personal data accounts and we're going to do this. So this is a way of me sharing so 4 types of solution patterns that some of our clients and partners have come in to say, this is what we're going to do. I mean, the simplest one is the app database, is to say, you know what, I'm not going to use user accounts anymore. I'd like to use a standardized way of using personal data accounts instead of user accounts. I can then still be able to set up the contract and then still be able to access the data in and out. And I'm happy. It looks, you know, my whole app looks and feels exactly the same as before. But we also have partners that came to us and that said, you know what, we have all these employee records and student records. Can we just use personal data accounts? It's really a lot easier because it then brings it across department easily rather than creating separate database for users. So that's another one that's come to us, which was kind of interesting from a design pattern from a point of view. And then finally, the third one, we have a omni-channel clients who came and said, you know, this actually solves my data portability issue. My customers can just bring their data with me when they come and interact with me across all my different brands and apps. I can then actually consolidate customer engagement. I can consolidate customer trust and customer experience into an omni-channel way of doing this for the enterprise. And finally, we do have some of the most enlightened enterprises who come in and actually said, you know what, this should be an entirely cross-sector thing. We should all come together and use this because that means our products can be made better with some of the standardizations, not just on the personal data account, but the data inside, creating scores for luxury products, creating scores for how depressed you are, or sorts of things, because personal data accounts have the ability to do very private computation of which the person only sees the data, but can be able to share it out through contract. So these are kind of the solution patterns that we've been faced with, at least when we were building the platform, and quite a number of them are starting to really bed this down and taking these solutions live, which is kind of exciting for us. I think Shawn alluded to the history that we spent across all the 7 universities, more than £10 million grant that's gone to this. So I actually want to acknowledge all my postdoctoral colleagues, as well as all the postdoc researchers and research PhD students that spend years and months in the project, which originally many people knew us as HATS. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Irene. And before we open it up, coming up on time, I want to be sure we leave some time for those of you on the call to ask a few questions. I'll go back to trust, Irene. And so this is a tricky question, but I know that, you know, certainly in my conversations, rarely is it as simple as where do I buy trust, but it effectively translates to how do I install trust in an application for a digital experience. And so where, in summarizing, would you say trust lives in a modern application or experience that's designed to garner trust from users and customers?
Yeah, great question. I mean, as I said in the presentation, trust really lives in the opinion of others. It really lives in a standardized opinion. The fact that there is some infrastructural standard, some transparent standard that we all ascribe to. And that's not easy, right? I mean, industry has been trying to do data conduct for a while, coming together and says, you know what, it should look like this, it should look like that. Everybody's trying to find some standards so that we then can create trust. But nobody can agree what these standards are. And this is the reason why trust is so hard. Trying to do a standard on your own, especially if you're a smaller organization, is really hard. And this is becoming a really prickly issue for apps that are really trying to do good around mental health, around any kind of thing to do with health. They just have a difficulty trying to get consumers or people to trust them. If there is a way to buy trust, people would just buy it. But I don't think it's about buying trust, because trust is a perceptual thing. It belongs to the individual who chooses to trust or not to trust. However, you can buy standards. You know, in security, we don't go when we pay $10. We don't say, I don't know about this bank. we kind of trust banks, not because we trust the brand or the people in it, but because we trust the infrastructure which is regulated on. Hence, standardization and regulation becomes very important. So if somebody really wants to buy trust, I will always say, buy infrastructure, buy standardizations, because that's what creates trust.
Terrific, thank you. So as we come to our final 5 or 6 minutes, and happy to stay a little longer for those of you who can, I'll encourage you to use the reactions button at the bottom of Zoom, and please simply give a thumbs up or a clap if you like, and we will queue you up for a question. Great, Kevin, let's see, am I able to, let's see, I think you'll need to do that, Teresa, if we can open up Kevin's audio. Hey, Kevin, go ahead with your question, please.
You say infrastructure, buy infrastructure rather than anything else, but aren't you really talking about habituation there?
Oh, absolutely, right? I mean, habituation is the standard. I mean, all habits are standards, right? It is the nature of which standards come about, and there are many different ways. If we start to think that we have a certain routine and the bus comes in a certain way, it becomes a habit, it becomes routine, then you trust that it will come. That is exactly what standardization is. The problem here is that we're talking about tech. And in tech, the conduct of tech is different across different organizations. You try to tell Facebook, you know what, we should do this. We should make a habit of this. Well, you know, why would they listen to you? They've got their standard and they've got, you know, 500 million people. So, hey, screw you, right? We'll do it our way.
Okay, can I just, because it was a two-part question. So the second part is we're actually a startup in mental health, and we're dealing with very, very sensitive information. But our approach has been to bake the privacy in and effectively architect the product around not having that problem, right? So in other words, getting rid of it by A, being utterly transparent, and B, mainly because, as you say, there are no standards, and it's just a nightmare to try and figure them out, and we'll die and wither on the vine before these questions get answered, as far as we're concerned. Like, I'm quite happy to look at something like Dataswift, you know, but for me right now, it's just not, it's not viable. It's too complicated a conversation to have because the other side isn't ready, if you know what I mean.
Well, I think that's exactly where a lot of the companies that come to see us is exactly where you are. It's hard. Baking privacy into a product means you sort of have to explain everything that you do. And I can tell you, I mean, many of these apps, they try to explain the best practices. They've got to come up with a white paper. They've got to open source their code. They try to do everything in an effort to try to create some kind of standardization and transparency. It's really hard. One of the reasons why our partners basically come and they say, you know what, we'll just give you a personal data account. So you just so one app, read it once. Another app, read it once. And after a while, it just gets into a standard. I think you are trying to do something absolutely right, which is trying to bake in the privacy. But I think what you need possibly to do is to say, what about the other apps? They should do this too. You know, if everybody who's in doing a mental health app or is trying to do any health app, they should do this. And guess what you immediately come up with? Apple and Google. That's exactly where they're going with this. They are trying to set the rules of standards to say, you know what, you can't touch my Bluetooth contact tracing unless you follow this standard. Because they know even they don't get trust unless they create the standard. Hope that answers a bit.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other questions? If, again, you'll use the reactions button. Jack Springman, if we can open up Jack's mic, please, Teresa.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, Jack.
Hi there. I just wanted to pick up on something you said very early on, Irene. It was around liability disappears. I'm not sure that's the case. I think what happens is there is a transfer of liability. And I looked at this last year when I was still at Control Shift, and we looked at it in quite a lot of detail, that liability actually transfers or is transferred by the terms and conditions from the creators of apps, and including to some degree even personal data accounts, to the individual. So actually what you're getting is, rather than the companies being liable, the risk is that the individual becomes liable and they don't have the expertise to recognize and manage that liability.
You're absolutely right. This was exactly where we came to in 2016, when the actual artifact itself, ownership, came about. We just kind of look and say, wait, this is where the whole, then everybody will just have this liability. It is true. But what happens is, when you have a liability on an app with, say, 100,000 users, you have the 100,000 users liability on you. But when you push it down to users, to individuals, you are distributing that liability across 100,000. Now you have the ability to create a standardized system that benefits all 100,000. So it took a while to create the governance system, like the way you create a banking framework. The reason why we call it data conduct is literally like we literally mirrored the financial conduct system. There is a model to which you can distribute that liability, in which case the per person liability becomes minimized, because there's a standardized process of which you make payment. And you definitely need a market regulatory framework for this. This absolutely needs to be regulated in some way. And since there isn't a regulatory framework to regulate it, you've got to create it. You've got to create that standard, and you've got to create that regulation. Otherwise, the transactions won't work. The contracts just won't work. So you're right in the sense that it's a shift of liability, but it's not a shift of liability back to one person. It's a shift of liability to a distributed number of people, of which then that liability is carried on by a governance framework that dictates the protocols and the framework on which those exchanges and the data conduct can happen. So our partners, for example, will all come and say, yep, I know I'm ABB and I know you are AAA. We know why we are the way we are because we follow that framework, and we know that if we do that, we carry some of that risk. So we have, for example, some partners put the entire data that's currently in personal data account also on their product server. They mirror it, they sync it, right? And they carry that liability too, but they still do, because they want the fact that there is a possibility that if they, and some of them do that without the ID, because they want to be able to distribute the liability in different ways, not all or nothing, but in a distributed way. So it now comes down to data architectures and different kinds of patterns.
Great question. Thank you, Jack. And I'll just say quickly, for those who do have to drop, thank you so much for joining. For those who can stick around, by all means do, and we'll take 2 or 3 more questions. And I think Angel, I've got a hand up from Angel.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for that explanation. It was a lot to take. Obviously, a long research journey there. Hello to Irene. I have so many questions, but I'm going to focus on one. Thinking that I'm designing some courses for undergrad management students. What would be the most important messages, or what would be the story you will think that important to share with the young professionals to be able to be more responsible, to embrace these new ideas and new way of behaving?
I actually don't think it's the responsibility of individuals at all. I think it's the responsibility of websites and applications that adopt personal data accounts to have, we have standardized way of explaining when you sign in and register and put in an email, the website will say, we are giving you a personal data account. Other than that, and then you agree to a contract and that's it. But I think it is up to the websites and applications to then say, this is what we're going to do, and this is how your privacy is protected and how we do data exchange. I think individuals shouldn't be, they can be educated on what they can do.
Yeah, no, what I meant, they want to be managers in companies, large companies or medium-sized. So what would they be trying to, as new champions, what were the things that should be championing? So there's also some change, transformation through through the businesses?
Ah, right. Okay. So if you're talking about our experience with some of the very large enterprises has been mostly good because one, there is the notion of the fact that they think they're doing the right thing. That's always one thing. That's great. And that's great to have an ethicist who believe that doing the right thing. Second, it actually is logically makes sense. It reduces complexity. It reduces the way you navigate your data architecture. You've got a third place to put things that you can be able to manage your whole data architecture to reduce risk and reduce liability. So it's logical. And thirdly, it actually saves you money. If you think about, if you have a large data lake, you have a huge issue around identifiability on one side and then usability on the other side. And that's because you put everything into one data lake. So if you can distribute that data lake and putting some of it into PDAs and some of it in the center, you then have ability to mitigate some of that risk and make your data a bit more usable while you're protecting privacy. So usually it's what we call heart, minds, and wallets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that will require also new methodologies to develop systems. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So a lot of our wonderful partners, they have wonderful design patterns. One of them put keys in the PDA, unlock it in their central server, and then unlock it back into the PDA. There's so many ways you can use it. And the system designers, the solutions architects are having a great time trying to think of different possibilities. I mean, if you read the white paper from ShareTrace, they've designed a great system around PDA. We think it's a great practice.
Yeah, thank you.
I was actually just going to, thank you, Angel. And I was going to say, I will plug our sister organization, Hat Lab. If you search for Hat Lab, I will be sure to get that in the link in the follow-up email. I think you'll find a lot of great research there. I also want to say, Angel, you hands down win the Best Background Award with the data placard, the letters there in the background. So that's fantastic. I think we have time for one more question if anyone has one they'd like to pose to Irene. No? Okay. Well, with that, thank you again, everyone. Thanks, Irene, for taking the time. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us, and we hope you enjoy it. This will be available as a recorded webinar that you can share with your coworkers and colleagues, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thanks so much. Have a great long weekend for those of you in the UK.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.